We are today with Doreen from Audubon. They are working on bird conservation across America, and the good news is they have been awarded the prestigious President Award at this year's History User Conference 2015. Congratulations, Doreen, on that.
Thank you. It's been an honor.
Doreen, for our audience, can you give a brief overview on what Audubon does and what's behind the conservation efforts that you do?
Sure. So, our organization is over 100 years old. We're actually named after John James Audubon, who painted the first portraits, literally one of the first field guides of North American birds. So, at the time our organization got started, when you said Audubon, people thought of birds. So, we took his name to represent the organization. And we actually started as a group of women that were concerned about birds being hunted for the feathers to be put into hats. And they organized, they formed the first National Audubon Society. And it was really a group of pretty much socialite women that heard about the issue actually through some ornithologists, some biologist professionals, and decided they wanted to form these societies, have their friends over for lunches and dinners, and talk about these issues and get them to act. So, interestingly enough, we still pretty much operate that way over 100 years later. We have volunteer small Audubon societies that operate locally. We have over 460 of those that work on bird conservation issues locally in their communities through talking to people, engaging, doing education programs, learning, doing more research and understanding the science behind the issues, and also lobbying to our legislation to pass laws that will protect birds, much like we did around the plume trade I spoke of. So we have this huge legacy of work, and we're very distributed, but we have this common goal of bird conservation.
Okay. How serious is the bird conservation aspect in the States right now?
Bird populations are declining. They have been. It's a complicated issue. It's a mix of habitat loss or issues with birds and why their nests are not producing. We're doing a lot of work to understand shorebird nesting rates and what are the threats to those populations thriving. So it's a lot of what we do is use birds as indicators to identify priority landscapes and then identify those threats and work to decrease them.
Okay. How actually are you utilizing GIS in all your efforts at Audubon?
So GIS has really become the connective tissue of our organization. As I described, we're distributed with these over 450 small societies. We have state programs that have professional staff. We have a little less than 50 nature education centers. We have professional science staff that does analysis using GIS and produces data. So GIS has really helped us to develop authoritative data sets that we can share with our network, and we can distribute them in creative ways through web applications, do really critical communication pieces about our work, things that are sometimes difficult to understand, such as our climate change modeling, or research that our biologists are doing on the shoreline about birds that nest there. So it's not only connected us and given us a single frame of reference through authoritative data, but it's helped us create stronger messages about what we do that are visually compelling and easy to understand.
Okay, let us talk about these three core aspects of GIS: data, technology, and people. So when it comes to data, how do you actually collect and collate the authoritative data for your projects?
When we first embarked on this about 4 years ago, we had a little less than 20 desktop users, not connected at all creating their own data sets about the organization locally, regionally, nationally, sometimes internationally. So that's just enough to be dangerous because our maps were not always telling the same story. So we took the data we had and identified what needed to be authoritative to be used by the most individuals in the organization. So that was about a year-long process and understanding how to set that up and centralize it, create editing workflows so it could be maintained. And now it's exciting with new data sets. We have all these new ways to collect data using ArcGIS Collector for mobile collection. But because the platform is so agile, we can also tap into other valuable data portals such as eBird that a lot of bird watchers use to record their sightings that can actually become valuable data for science.
Okay, so you said you moved from a distributed or you did desktop server model. So how was the roadmap for that migration happen?
I like how you mentioned people and data as these kind of separate components, but they always overlap.
Yeah.
So a big part of it was under talking to our users and just saying, what are you doing? How are you using GIS? And we found that some were creating data, some were visualizing existing data, some were managing data in shape files. Very few had geodatabases, so it was really just sorting out what we currently had and then identifying what was priority out of that, and then moving that into a single organizational geodatabase, then setting up an initial architecture of a staged environment and a production environment to move that data into spatial data engines using Microsoft SQL Server. And then starting to push out services so people could see what this looks like. So it's really exciting because with web services to a lot of our users, we're now up to over 800 on ArcGIS Online and close to 300 desktop users. To many of those, their first introduction to GIS is ArcGIS Online or a web viewer or collector or story map. That has become what GIS is to them, which is really exciting to see this technology get socialized in that way.
I don't think it's a very easy task for anyone to actually embrace GIS because especially to non-technical biologists, conservationists, bird people. Okay, talking to bird people about technology. So now we come to the core of people. So how did you manage that?
Yeah, so you get to all the points of how do you socialize a new tool in an organization that's incredibly distributed and federated. So the biggest thing for us was just taking the data sets that we thought were most valuable to the most individuals in the organization, doing a jumpstart of an enterprise, and pushing out services so people could see data in new ways through story maps and web applications. And so it's sharing those outcomes once you get your data set up, and people just get really excited and say, I want that. What do I need to do to get that? And then we can go back to the process again and say, well, what data do you have? What data do you need to tell your story? And then our enterprise just grows on the data side. Our outputs grow. And everyone sort of embraces it, once we have these strong use cases for the network.
So can I say story maps has now become the core for your all your activities and outreach efforts?
Yeah, I would say that's one of three cores. The story map is really important for us for public-facing materials or explaining issues to individuals that have control over the threats we see to birds. I'll give you a really good example. We are very interested in monitoring buildings.
Actually, can you talk about some important applications using story maps that you're doing at Audubon currently?
Sure. So story maps have been one of the core capabilities for our activists to use to build compelling messages and visuals about the issues they care about so they can articulate them very well to the individuals that have influence over the threats to birds that surround the issues. So one really good example is bird collisions. We have 3 local chapters in North Carolina, one in Winston-Salem, one in Raleigh, and one in Charlotte, that are all concerned about this issue of finding birds that are either injured or sometimes a fatality occurs from striking into a building during migration. And there's a variety of reasons why that happens. Sometimes it's lights being on at night during migration, or the presentation of vegetation around highly reflective windows. So it looks like a continuous forest to birds, and they don't realize that glass is there. So these groups have been monitoring buildings and identifying hotspots so they can talk to the building owners or city officials if they're government buildings, such as in Raleigh, about the issue in a way that opens up a discussion rather than these buildings are doing something bad and you must stop. So I have a really good example of a story map here that shows data in Raleigh, North Carolina. It was collected using ArcGIS Collector, which also allows us to take photos of injured or dead birds if the collector is not sure on the species of that bird, but also is a very compelling image. And what we've done is we've taken the data of the strikes and created this really nice heat map to show, the yellow are the areas where there's the highest numbers of strikes. And what we found out is that in Raleigh, those buildings are very much controlled by the city, so the chapter is working with city council to understand what they can do to decrease those strikes. And what we love about story maps is that we can bring in compelling maps, but we can also bring in text, photo. This is a nice picture of the buildings and the ownership and talking more about the issue. Then lastly, we can discuss how you can help once we've built up the story arc and it becomes a very positive conversation about the issue and not pointing fingers at anybody.
Okay. Great examples of how you're using GIS and especially for bird people, as you said, to in the area of bird conservation. Congratulations, Doreen, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.